Thank you to the Heritage Education Network Belize for organizing the Culture Symposium, which enables community members, scholars like myself, and heritage practitioners to connect and think through possibilities for future projects and collaborations. In this presentation, I summarize and reflect on takeaways from research and community engagement I conducted for my dissertation and first book. In particular, I consider the implications of a long history of rhetoric and programming related to intersections between education, cultural heritage, and social and economic development in Belize. My first research experience in Belize began in March 2005 with the Chowheash Archaeological Project, CHAP, and Kriol community of Crooked Tree. In addition to this region's Maya, Kriol, and British colonial history, another important piece of the cultural landscape is the rich ecosystem and related tourism. The wetland systems surrounding Crooked Tree are part of a bird and wildlife sanctuary co-managed by the National Forestry Department and Belize Audubon Society. The CHAP started in the late 1980s as a community-initiated project directed by American archaeologist Ann Pyburn. Residents had long known about Chowheash, and village leaders recognized the cultural and economic capital of Maya archaeological heritage. When the CHAP ended in the early 21st century, not all community expectations related to site development and tourism had been met. However, the project developed a foundation for community heritage engagement and revealed a complex web of cultural knowledge, public memory, tourism imaginaries, and archaeological research. Scholars continue to build off this legacy with new avenues of research and engagement through entities like the Crooked Tree Museum and Cultural Heritage Center. I went to Belize as a graduate student interested in community-based archaeology and intrigued by the nascent African and Maya History Project, AMH, a Belizean curricular initiative to integrate African and Maya history into elementary schools, and the development of national heritage infrastructure, policy, and programs. In my graduate research, I aimed to understand the impacts of archaeology and formal education in Crooked Tree and the intersections and tensions between community needs, competing heritage values, and archaeological and educational practice. Additionally, as I explored the relationship of the state and citizens through the lenses of archaeology and education, I noted the ways actors like teachers, students, and community leaders negotiated a range of heritage values and processes and participated in heritage meaning making. I conducted interviews with Belizean elementary school students, teachers, community leaders, tour guides, and national heritage actors, and engaged in participant observation at schools, community and educational events, and archaeological sites. In addition to Crooked Tree, I also worked in the nearby village of Biscayne that did not have the same history of archaeology. Through my research, I came to understand the central roles young people play in Belizean society. I learned that many youth knew about archaeology, were excited about the field, and were interested in ancient Maya culture. Although Crooked Tree residents engage in rich cultural and linguistic practices, I noted that rural Creole heritage was often marginalized in official contexts like tourism, archaeology, and curriculum. I witnessed teachers instructing students about culture, but the content covered in classrooms, textbooks, and museums often essentialized and compartmentalized cultural practices. Children then replicated reified versions of culture. For example, ethnic groups identified with certain clothes, foods, music, and dances. But some young people I spoke with articulated complex realities like mixed backgrounds and dynamic cultural practices. I also noted that many adults were concerned about outside influences and cultural sustainability and advocated for their culture and history as resources for community improvement and economic uplift. After I completed my PhD, I wanted to expand my work with a historical lens to understand how certain ideas about identity, race, culture, and history, and economic development were established and reinforced by colonial actors, international development agencies, and early state actors in educational and archaeological practices. I also sought evidence of how subject citizens responded to and resisted official heritage discourse. I examined documents from the late 19th to mid 20th century, including colonial education reports and policy documents, minute papers, archaeological travel logs, and research and international aid reports. Given the symposium's focus on the creative or orange economy, I reflected on this prior work and current economic, cultural, and social dynamics of heritage in Belize, including intersections between citizenship, tourism, education, and economic development. The earliest formal colonial education structures in the late 19th and early 20th centuries functioned as apparatuses to control and surveil subject citizens while ensuring they contributed to society, cultivate British values and practices, and manage difference, as seen in this quote from the 1892 Annual Report on Primary Education. Early colonial education materials also defined and reified racial categories, privileged certain cultural groups and practices over others, and denigrated and delegitimized African and rural Creole cultural practices and histories. British and American archaeologists and explorers of the time also constructed and contributed to an official heritage discourse that justified the exploration, documentation, and surveillance of colonial landscapes. Colonial leaders established archaeologists as authorized heritage experts over sites and artifacts, privileged scientific examination and extraction of archaeological resources, emphasized ancient Maya heritage as Belize's archaeological heritage, and reinforced colonial racial ideologies like those in educational discourse and practice. In a 1928 Illustrated London News article about Maya exploration in British Honduras, Sir Frederick Kenyon, director of the British Museum, stated, "Trade follows the flag, but it is equally true that economic development follows the spade of the archaeologists." Trends in archaeology and education linking heritage to development continued well into the late 20th century. Influenced by widespread concerns about the British Empire's social responsibilities, colonial subjects' learning difficulties, and development agendas, beginning in the early 20th century, some colonial administrators and social science experts contributed to the development of adaptive and native education programs. These efforts centered on adapting educational content to the aptitudes, occupations, and traditions of subject citizens to promote community advancement, social and economic development, and inculcate ideals of citizenship, seen in the quote here. Beginning in the 1930s and 1940s, adaptive education, including vernacular language instruction, handicraft programs, industrial arts, and vocational training, were implemented throughout the West Indies. Acknowledging the potential economic values of local products, some Belizean schools developed handicraft and agricultural education. Though primary source discourse about adaptive education suggests colonial recognition of the value of non-European heritage, descriptions of these programs utilize terms like practical, useful, and remunerative, revealing that their goals were less about preserving and celebrating cultural traditions and more on training students to be productive members of society and colony. As many Caribbean nations transitioned to independence in the mid to late 20th century, transnational organizations and international development agencies became increasingly involved in supporting social services like education. Influenced by Western capitalist ideology and market interests, UNESCO policies emphasized connections between social and economic development and political autonomy and identified heritage manifestations as marketable assets through handicrafts and tourism. A 1964 UNESCO report on educational programming in British Honduras advocated for teacher and student training in agricultural education and articles of local character, such as pottery, woodwork, and weaving, that could serve as a source of income for the rural population. Nationalist politicians, public intellectuals, and education actors also identified education, cultural programming, and relevant materials, and social development as integral to economic stability and the establishment of an independent Belizean state and proud citizenry, as shown in this quote regarding the aims of primary education from an educational report by Chief Education Officer William Fonseca. Archaeology has also long been considered an important economic and national resource. In an article about the development of Belizean archaeology, Norman Hammond noted that during the independence period, substantial attention was paid to the restoration of the site as a national monument and as a contribution to economic development as tourism burgeoned. And nationalist politicians materialized claims to ancient Maya heritage in their vision for an eventual construction of the new Belizean capital of Belmopan, where buildings were constructed to emulate the style of Maya pyramids. As I have conducted extensive research on education, it is not surprising that youth have featured frequently in my conversations with Belizeans. Teachers, tour guides, and national heritage actors noted the central roles of young people in Belizean society and expressed frustrations about them losing their sense of identity and not contributing enough. These tropes are common in many societies and in post-colonial discourse. All that said, the connections people identified between youth, culture, and history in discussions about the future of Belize's citizenry and commentary about young people as cultural ambassadors is notable. Additionally, the long legacy of intersections between heritage, education, and social and economic development has important implications for heritage initiatives today. The AMH texts note aims to contribute to the building or strengthening of knowledge and values consistent with the development of an invigorated, self-enriching national Belizean identity. State heritage actors I spoke with emphasized the social and economic development potential of cultural education, archaeotourism, as shown in this quote from a leader in national archaeology. Several Crooked Tree residents also told me education focused on culture, history, and archaeology was important to prepare young people for contact with tourists. Edmund Banks, who has long worked in the local tourism industry, told me the most important thing for Belizean kids to learn about history is their culture and ancestors. You got to learn your history if you want to be a tour guide. Youth are important members of the Belizean citizenry and play integral roles in processes of social change and cultural sustainability. I've witnessed young people process, preserve, and transform cultural knowledge in ways that have significant implications and potential directions for future community heritage research and programming, including those related to creative and cultural economies. Although teachers and other adults express concerns about young people, Creole people fastly forgetting their culture, many youth engage in camping, fishing, and hunting and have extensive knowledge about local flora and fauna. Paralleling Melissa Johnson's work, I've witnessed the ways bush activities persist as central Creole practices for socialization and the exchange of ecological knowledge. Crooked Tree youth are told stories about community identity, village history, and elders, and recount stories that connect with their own interests and experiences. When my grad students asked young people to write about why they love Crooked Tree, the students' narratives highlighted diverse and creative ways young Creole people process and construct knowledge about culture and history. Some talked about their connections to ecological resources with detailed stories about hunting, fishing, and trips to the farm with family members. Others recounted their own lengthy and entertaining versions of folk tales. I am excited about the possibilities for future work that can continue to investigate youth as cultural agents and consider what knowledge and experiences they may bring to Belize's orange economies. I am sensitive to scholarly critiques that programming focused too heavily on the economic potential of cultural heritage supports neoliberal agendas, privileges market interests, and reinforces social and economic inequities in communities. However, the orange economy may provide innovative alternatives to traditional economic tropes. Cultural tourism continues to be a central component of Belizean society. Young people know about and have interests in archaeology. More research is needed and is being done about how youth learn about heritage-themed career avenues and their goals in these undertakings. I plan to follow up with young people I worked with and Crooked Tree to see how they are using their knowledge and talents within and outside of the tourism economy as tour guides, teachers, call center staff, and in other industries. Additionally, more could be done to foster creative outlets for youth as storytellers and cultural agents. The Institute for Social and Cultural Research, heritage organizations, and community centers and museums across the country are supporting so many exciting cultural, artistic, and creative programs. Researching the impacts of these programs on young people and educators in diverse communities will reveal important lessons for future heritage engagements. And as noted by Belizean scholars and heritage actors, teachers need more resources, support, and training in heritage disciplines like public history, ensuring they have opportunities to effectively implement cultural programs in their classrooms and fulfill their goals of ensuring student success for future generations. Thank you very much.